Everything is official. Hello, everybody, for today's Zubi lecture. My name is Frank Sliegers, Professor for Landscape Architecture. I'm organizing this, and thanks for Nathan Chung and Stacy behind the scene here, organizing and looking at everything went well. I just want to make some announcements and also some general comments. So Zubi Lectures is named by Zubi, and he was a former head of LAP in the 70s, and he and his wife Margaret endowed a fund to bring excellent scholars to the department and to stimulate discussion and enrich our community. So we have always great lectures internationally, and we keep doing this also in this online world. It has been very successful. And what I just want to announce next week, before I hand it over to Daryl, he will introduce our speaker today. Next week we have actually two lectures. One is on Monday, 4 o'clock. Dan Nichol, and he's talking about the Big Dig, the infamous mega project, and this that remastered Boston's plan. So that's be a very interesting one. It's also co-sponsored by architecture and BCT, building construction technology. And then on the next Thursday we have Kofi Boone, and he's talking about notes on resilience, and he's our annual SES School of Environment and Sustainability Bridge Scholar, and there's some other activities around it. So please stay tuned and keep joining us. And now I will hand it over to Daryl.
All right, well, thank you very much, Frank. I'm Daryl Ramsey-Musoff, one of the faculty at LARC in the regional planning portion. I've met Evis just basically this year. We're both both members of the Planners of Color Interest Group, and we're both sort of operating mentoring programs. And so it's been very fun to work with her, as well as to share resources. And, you know, in talking with her, she's got like this gang of people that I know. And I was like, I had no idea, because they're from the University of Illinois, Chicago. So I was just saying to her, it's really great when you can graduate with a cohort and you know people ahead and behind you, because it's kind of like going into a family with this urban planning thing. So let me give you her biography, because she is a well-accomplished young professor. Dr. Evis Garcia Zambrana is an assistant professor in city and metropolitan planning in the University of Utah. Dr. Garcia chairs Planners for Puerto Rico, a group of academic practitioners from ACSP, APA, FEMA, Centro, UPR, and Society for Puerto Rican Planners, among others that are collaborating in recovery efforts in Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria and Irma. She also is involved with the National Puerto Rican Agenda, the Disaster Housing Recovery Coalition of the National Low-Income Housing Coalition, and Centro's Idea Kimun. Ooh, did I just mangle that? All of which promote Puerto Rico's recovery. You got to take yourself seriously sometimes and sometimes not. Dr. Garcia has a PhD in urban planning and policy from the University of Illinois at Chicago. So, oh, and one last thing before we let Dr. Garcia take over. Because we got hit with a couple of trolls last week, we're gonna go ahead and disable the chat until we get to the Q&A. So when you do have something to say, just raise your hand and we'll go full on, because I don't want our environment to be disrespectful to anyone who's here or just anything like that. I know it's a bit draconian, and I'm sure the faculty are gonna talk about it next week, but for this time, let's just hold tight. So with all that, okay, let's get some snaps for Evis.
Oh, thank you so much, Daryl, for such a kind introduction. So I'm going to share my PowerPoint. I hope that everybody can see it. So I have like several different projects in Puerto Rico. As you can probably tell, I'm Puerto Rican. I have been living in the United States for 15 years, although on and off sometimes in Puerto Rico. Like the year that I actually spent in Puerto Rico, so that's like a year ago. After like Hurricane Maria hit Puerto Rico, and we are actually celebrating the 3-year anniversary. I should say that that's no celebration, but it has been 3 years since like Hurricane Maria and also Irma hit Puerto Rico. So that was like September 20 of like 2017. And my family was like very impacted. They're like farmers in the islands. They were like completely devastated. They didn't have like electricity, and this was like all over the islands. So I was personally very distressed, and to be honest, I think that my colleagues let me go to Puerto Rico and do this fellowship, apply for a grant that is like from the university to go to Puerto Rico to do these several like efforts there, because I could not stop crying. So that's kind of like the reason that I got into disaster planning, because like really I'm more like into housing, community development, and public participation. So that's like my specialty. But since this event, I have been very interested, obviously, in the recovery of Puerto Rico. Just like Daryl was mentioning that there's some colleagues from the University of Illinois Chicago. I wanted to show like some pictures here of like some work that I have been doing with some partners in Chicago. I work with the Puerto Rican Agenda, which is like the largest Puerto Rican organization there. And a lot of like diaspora organizations were like actually like helping the island. So I was creating a partnership first of emergency relief, of like sending like food and water. Later on, we figured out that it was better to actually support the businesses there. Something I would have known from the literature if I was like embedded in that, but I wasn't. So it was like really like a learning process. We were collecting funds to build housing. This house that you see here in the picture was completely destroyed, and we actually, I didn't have the picture of the new house, but through the Puerto Rican Agenda funds and the municipality, we were able to like build a home there. Here's like the picture of like in Comerillo, which is like one of the Chicago sister city. There's several sister cities, and the schools, like many places in the United States, they actually have been closing. So these were like actually refurbished to be community centers, community disaster centers, in where they will have like solar power and also like showers and places for people to go. So that's something that has been happening all over the island, and it actually has been helpful now that there has been also earthquakes and there's like COVID. So there's the need of people like sheltering and having use of these actually closed schools. And then on the other picture, we have a group of like developers that actually I helped to move from Chicago to Puerto Rico. They have been, they bought some properties for like older adults and to rehab, to low income housing tax credits. But also we are looking right now into like vacant properties. So those are just other kinds of research that I'm doing in Puerto Rico, looking at vacancy, also looking at informal housing and reconstruction. And also I have a project with the APA that it's about reconstruction of like areas that are contaminated. So that's some of my other research. If you're like interested, for those of you that might want to connect after this talk. So for this particular talk, I'll be talking about nonprofits. Especially a lot of the nonprofits in Puerto Rico are small nonprofits, and how they have been impacted, but also what are the things that they have been doing. So I'm gonna Pass the slide. All right, so I gave a little bit of like background of Hurricane Irma. So it was a little before Maria, so September 6th, while Maria was on the 20th. And so the picture that I want you to see here is that already when like Hurricane Maria hit, just like 2 weeks later, people were living in shelters. There was a lot of people without potable water, and already like 1/3 of the population was without electricity. Then when like Hurricane Maria hit, then everybody was without electricity, making it the second largest like blackout in the world. And there was a large percentage of the population that were actually without electricity for 6 months. And at the 1 year mark, everybody like was able to get electricity. But just think about these like nonprofits having to give more services in that scenario. And the Hurricane Irma, it has been like the third costliest storm in the United States after Katrina and Harvey. But in terms of like the CDBG DR funds, it actually has been the largest that it has been ever been given. So it's like $18.1 billion. In terms of the death toll, it's kind of like debatable. There was like not that many direct deaths, but because we have like an older population, and electricity was like off for so long, a lot of people had comorbidities or like other health conditions that actually like they deteriorated very quickly, and there was a lot of deaths, closer to 3,000, but again debatable like how many. So we are going to be talking about nonprofits because they are very important for community planning. A lot of these funds, like the CDBG DR funds, they are expected that they will go to nonprofits and local nonprofits. Nonprofits are really like key actors in like long-term disaster recovery. So think about all those organizations that go to like when any place experiences a disaster, but they don't stay there long term. So these like organizations are there to stay, and all the actors and all the people that work there. So you want them to become more capable of dealing with disasters in the future, which is like one of the ideas. So you want to like increase also their capacity now, but in the future. But one question is like, do they have like actually the capacity to provide recovery services? And we wanted to know like what affects recovery capacity of nonprofits after disasters. And when I said we, it's because actually this like research was sponsored by the Center for Puerto Rican Studies, which is like in Hunters College. So I'm part of a collaborative called Idea Común. It's a lot of academics that are part of that, actually, and many of them that are like part of ACSP, and other ones are like in Puerto Rico, a lot of planning practitioners. And we wanted to, well, we did give a lot of workshops to nonprofits about all kinds of things. Many of them are about obtaining federal funds. But this is like one of the main reasons for doing this research. So the research is like quantitative and qualitative. I'm personally a qualitative researcher, but for this, like we did some surveys that actually we hired some students here at the University of Utah to analyze. And this was done over the phone. And it was like a random sample. So we just collected the list of nonprofits, and then we had like 68% response rate, which was like really, really good. And in terms of screening, we wanted someone who was either the executive director of the organization or a board member. And it was a survey of about 20 questions. So these are all the questions, but basically they're like in 3 buckets. So it was like looking at the organization itself, looking at their capacity, And in terms of capacity, we really concentrated in the number of like grants that they receive. And then we look at questions about networking and them connecting to other nonprofits, to governments, and so on, as that's also important for being able to obtain funds and know of like some particular opportunities. So just to give you like a very broad background on these organizations, they were like incorporated in Puerto Rico, or 99%. 80% were incorporated at the federal level. So this means that only 80% were able to obtain federal funds. So something that we were trying to do is like talking to nonprofits about getting their federal status. 99% have a board. They were established on average or in 1996. The median number of employees is 5. So that's why the title of this presentation is about small nonprofits in particular. They actually, many of them were involved in the community. So 64% are really involving the community in what they do in their everyday life, which is like very, very connected to the grassroots. And there's like 78 municipalities in the island, and we actually got surveys from 46 municipalities. So in terms of like how or which kind of services they provide, so you have like mostly it's like human services, education, healthcare, religion related, and then we have like housing and shelter and community development. So a lot of these organizations obviously could apply for like CDBG DR funds, but one of the things that actually you have been doing through the Centro, and something I teaching a class that is going to be an online class about like how the nonprofits could be transformed into community development organizations, or like development corporations, or CDCs, and also housing. So these are some of the things that are really like lacking in terms of like the nonprofit landscape. So as I said before, the nonprofits were really affected themselves. About 44% were like their buildings were damaged. They cannot really get in. They really have to like, you know, get SBA loans, receive like FEMA assistance. All of them, so like, or actually 23%, so an increase for services. And then later on we have like a little bit of analysis of that. Many lost employees. There are a lot of people that actually like moved to the United States or lost like information and data, or people that were generally, you know, displaced as well. And we did the qualitative research. So in each one of these like 3 categories, I will be sharing some quotes from people. So the first one is about all the damages that they had. And it says like our administrative offices were damaged due to leaks, and our services could not be provided for a week. Despite not having electricity, the employees who were able to arrive at the office arrived and were in the streets helping people in the shelters. This second one I'm just going to summarize, but it talks about how the employees were like traumatized and trying to take care of their families while at the same time trying to provide services for the community. And we saw a lot of like quotes about increasing demand because there was like more need. So we wanted to see if the mission that they have, it changed. And as you can see, this is before or pre-disaster is in the orange, and the bluish is like the post-disaster. And there was like changes in their mission, like all across the board, trying to like fulfill some different needs that were not previously anticipated. And the majority was around like education and community development. But I wanted to notice that that one of the largest increases, even though to begin it was kind of small, it was disaster preparedness. So that's something that it seems like most organizations now were doing. in terms of like the interaction with other organizations, we wanted to see if it's increased or it decreased. And the thing that we noticed is that now people had more interactions with like local nonprofits. So after the disaster, most people were talking to each other and collaborating with other nonprofits. However, people were feeling that they had less communication or less interaction with government organizations. There's some literature that speaks about like how like overwhelmed government is, but there's other one that talks about like how they're so slow to respond, while like nonprofits are most they not only can respond faster to some of the issues that are going on in the community, but also like response in terms of like having an answer to people. And we also saw a decrease in the diaspora organizations, which is something that I found interesting, given that the Puerto Rican agenda in Chicago, it was like so active, and there was a lot of groups that I knew from the United States that were also going to Puerto Rico to offer help, but a lot of people saw a decrease in that. There's some literature that speaks about a lot of organizations are actually concentrating in receiving so those people that have been displaced. And in Chicago, there was a big movement that the actually like the local HUD was like accepting people to receive like Section 8, and they were like really mobilizing on that sense, which we could be that one of the reasons that why it was like decreasing. And actually in terms of migration, there were about like 260,000 Puerto Ricans that left the island during that time. So this like quote talks about like all the work that the community organizations were doing, that they were like basically outside because they couldn't be in the building. It was everything old school, doing it like on paper, but that they made a lot of connections in the community with other organizations, precisely because everybody was like out on the street trying to like help out each other, buying food for people, just distributing food, that kinds of things. So people were mobilized. The civic sector was really mobilized. And people talked about increasing then the communication with like others, and how they were almost calling each other daily and coordinating within their communities and neighborhoods. Then in terms of like the government, people had like a lot of like criticisms about it. For example, this person says services and communication with the government has been practically zero. So what we did, it was with private organizations. As far as the government, we couldn't get a hold of them after the hurricane. The government haven't shown much interest in helping us. I don't know about other organizations, but at least in our case with the organization, there hasn't been much communication. And this is like a similar quote. My personal position in regard to how the government has handled disaster is that they're obviously handled very poorly. They haven't been a government that involves the stakeholders in making decisions of how to use funds, which is essentially essential in improving the situation deeply, not just cosmetically. So there was a lot of like also complaints about not being transparent with the federal funds. And if you know about also Puerto Rico is in a fiscal crisis. And a lot of people were saying that this debt that was like $72 billion, it wasn't really legal because the government could not document in what the money was spent. So there's like a lot of concerns from government in general, from the nonprofits. So in terms of like the knowledge, so we wanted to see how much they knew about particular sources of funding. And again, we are using this to be able to like give like webinars and offer like technical assistance. In general, you can see that the majority of people might have known about us, about a particular grant, but they haven't applied. So it kind of like demonstrates that maybe like some of the workshops need to be more like hands-on or more like technical assistance. And many people haven't heard about many of these funds. As you can see, obviously FEMA and SBA were kind of like the most popular ones. We wanted to know like how people learn about, you know, these grant opportunities or these like different webinars that were offered. And so the majority of people, it was like through like news and like social media, or just searching on their own. There's also like the FEMA Disaster Recovery Center, which has a lot of information, particularly about FEMA, but they might have like other information as well. So people, about 13% use of that. I was particularly interested about this one in terms of like the hearing from other nonprofit organizations about opportunities. And obviously this idea of like social media and how people were like sharing this information. In comparison, only 4% heard about these opportunities from local or their state agency. We also wanted to see what people would like to see more in terms of like their what they need. So a lot of people, this one they could select everything really. And the one that says more funding, actually we added that later. We didn't ask about more funding because people keep saying other more funding. So that's not, I think that if we ask about more funding, 100% of people will say yes, we need more funding. But they need more information, technical assistance for project, training in recovery issues, and being able to have social networking and access to data. So this is like on their own words. There are a lot of things that we need: great knowledge in how to receive funds from the government. There are a lot of funding given to improve the community development, etc. But the process to get the funds is very long and it requires a lot. I will also say that here in Puerto Rico, we need more courses specialized in teaching program management. There are a lot of people here who work in construction or as workers who will have an interest in growing, but that don't have the knowledge in program management. I also want to mention that we did like another survey that it was like on what people knew and to do like continuing education. So it was on individual basis as opposed to nonprofit or organizational basis. And we found that there's like a lot of gap between knowing about all these federal processes and disasters. So Puerto Rico hasn't had like a disaster like this in modern history. And it's not something that is like taught in schools, or there's like there's no programs for this kind of like learning. So it feels like everybody's like learning about disaster recovery, and also like how to obtain these funds. So we asked about where did they go for the networking, and there was a lot of like local organizations that were mentioned over and over and again. The workshops that they put together, and there was like some non-local ones, so which you might be more familiar with, like Hispanic Federation and Enterprise, Neighbor Works, Unidos por Puerto Rico, and the Center for Puerto Rican Studies. But many of the people were not really going to these workshops or networking. So it's like actually about 75% of them, they were not. Only a smaller percentage were like more connected, which means that they were the ones like, again, getting the technical assistance and learning about these like different federal funds. Some quotes here. It says many of the organizations have contacted us to do trainings and work together. The networks are there to help and prepare and train people so they can respond quickly and effectively to whichever issue comes up. So a lot of what happened is that a lot of these organizations started to do collaborative grants. and also thinking about doing collaborations for community planning. So in Puerto Rico, the Foundation for Puerto Rico was given the planning funds. So there's like 27 different programs in the action plan, and planning has their own sources of funds. And there was like more collaboration as like, you know, Foundation for Puerto Rico also providing technical assistance for community plans. And so at the same time, people were a little bit hesitant to collaborate with others, especially people that were might be from the outside. So a person expressed, we know that it's a reality that there are a lot of people with bad intentions. They are seeing a big opportunity to make profit out of a disaster, and we are aware of this. We are working with the best alliances we can, but we have to keep our eyes open on who we are making deals with. I'm just gonna leave it at that, but there's like a study that it was done for the Center of New Economy in Puerto Rico that basically shows that 90% of all the federal funds go to organizations in the outside of Puerto Rico. So they're the majority getting like many of these federal contracts and opportunities, and then going to the island. So a lot of the local nonprofits actually like see that there's a lot of interest from the outside, just to be able to capitalize on it. At least that's what they see it, the way they see it, without having like a true partnership. So we also look at like the funds that they receive before the disaster, and the majority were getting like donations from members, which obviously during the time of crisis, these like funds really decrease. Some got like donations from private entities, but this money that is like from central government here is mostly, we're looking at anything that has to do with like federal funds, because they're usually like allocated to the central government, and then the nonprofits might actually request for those funds. So we can see that to begin with, there was not a lot of funding that actually came from federal funds. The organizations that we said, the majority are small, as you can see. The majority are like 100 to like 100K to like 500K in any given year. And then we did an analysis, it's like a negative binomial regression, in order to look at capacity in terms of like defining it aside the grants that people receive. And I'm going to skip a little bit on this like methodology, and I just wanted to get to the conclusion here, in terms of like the numbers that people receive. So for those that were located within San Juan, they were like 0.9 more likely to receive grants. A lot of that, in terms of like the qualitative research, is that people there are actually like networking a lot more. They're like closer to each other. So the majority of the population is in the metro area. And in terms of the interaction with other nonprofits, they were more likely to receive 1.2 more grants. If they knew like people in government or federal agencies and interacting with them, it was the same, 1.2 grants. If they attended conferences on workshops, 1.2 more likely to have grants. If they had like a community development focus, they were also more likely, 1.5 times more likely. And there were some sectors that actually, like health, it was more likely, and then farming was more likely to receive funding as well. So we're getting like close to the conclusions here, so we can have more time for the questions. But in terms of like this like capacity the location matters, but it doesn't matter as much as other factors that like we saw in terms of like connecting with nonprofits or having like a focus on like community development, for instance. More outreach needs to happen to like rural areas in order for like networking to take place. So there was like, again, we mentioned that certain sectors have like more of an advantage, like health and community development and farming. And that just connection to peers is like important. There's a lot of energy in the nonprofit sector. As we saw, a lot of people are like changing missions in order to better serve the needs after the disaster. They have seen an increased demand, but also there has been more like intensified local interaction between the different nonprofits. And just in general, they want more assistance and help in capacity building just across the board, from like understanding recovery or even how to do like public participation, how to connect better with local communities to grant writing. And that's what I have. Just wanted to have like at least some time for questions. I think we have like 20 minutes.
Well, I think everyone can get some snaps up as Mark is leading the way for our guest speaker. If you have questions, throw your hands up in the air, wave them like you just don't care. All right, looks like Molly has a question.
Yeah, I'm wondering whether you did any study about those nonprofits who collaborated together on funding applications, whether they had greater success because there was a collaboration among community organizations.
I didn't like look at the degree of success. I just like knew like in terms of like the interviews that people were collaborating. And there was also like a lot of like micro grants. So that's another strategy. There will be like some organizations that got together funds, right, in collaboration. And maybe sometimes it could be like, I know that, for example, Oxfam and Hispanic Federation and Ayuda Legal Huracán Maria, they're parts of the National Low Income like coalition disaster recovery. So because of that, they have applied to many grants, and that now they're giving like smaller grants to local leaders, and they're using their nonprofit status to actually get people in the community. You know, I think the maximum they can get is like $7,000 of these like micro grants. And because like one issue is that there's a lot of like organizations in the community that are not you know, they don't have their nonprofit status, but they're doing very important disaster work. So I know they have been successful, and I know like of several examples like that because these like long-term partnerships and networking, if there's a grant opportunity, it's like researchers, right? That's kind of like what we do. Like we put the grants together with people that we know, and you know, I would like to think that we're more successful because of that. But I haven't done a survey. I put actually like or going to put a grant proposal to do like a follow-up survey. And also, so this would be like a good question to ask. Something else I wanted to add to this survey is like response to like the earthquakes and also like COVID. So, but that's like a great question. Thank you so much. Yeah, Mark.
Hi, thank you. That was a terrific talk. Thank you, Dr. Garcia. I really enjoyed your presentation, and I may have missed this in the presentation, so hopefully my question doesn't seem too off track, but it seems to me that attention in terms of a lot of disaster responses, that there are organizations or agencies that have capacity and resources and expertise, but they don't have local knowledge. And then there are the sort of nonprofit groups that you're talking about who have knowledge, who have existing relationships with the community and community networks and so on. And is there any way to kind of create a sort of mandate that any sort of outside agency that's receiving funding has to partner with local organizations to ensure that there's going to be some process of community engagement and some, so I don't know if that can be sort of built into funding mechanisms to sort of ensure that it's not a kind of top-down approach or people coming in who don't really have any existing relationships. So I'm wondering.
Yeah. So there's, you know, with the federal funds, it's very hard to do anything that is different at the local level. So I haven't like investigated that. But in looking at other kinds of policies, it's hard to yeah, put restrictions like that. However, the program that is like for planning, which is the from the Foundation for Puerto Rico, for that one, the leads have to be people in the community. So because they're community plans, and that's the way that they were like envisioned. And that has something to do because a lot of, you know, there was a lot of talk in the island from looking at best practices and like good models of like, so that the New York RISE was like a similar model in where it was like community plans. So I think that, you know, planners are aware of the importance of like having local control. So the way that has been structured is that the community group can be a group that is not even a nonprofit. It just can be a group of people that wants to do community planning. And then they require that they do partner with as many stakeholders as possible, including nonprofits. So they have to show in their application that they you know, they are being, it's a community plan, right? It's not like one small group doing something. And the Foundation of Puerto Rico has been collecting a list that you needed to like enter your name and all that like ahead of time, of like people who will be like consultants, or they can do the bids. And then so the community can actually like choose who is their consultant. You know, and as you can imagine, a lot of those consultants are trying to create their own partnerships there, or like creating social relationships to see, because it's not also that easy, like in the sense of like having a community group think at the, you know, think about creating a community plan. I mean, I think that we can all relate to the difficulty of that. that maybe, you know, one of the fears that we also have, but let's go to another point. I think that to finalize the first thought, at least in planning, we are looking into community control, and then others can bid or help. But another thought is that the most like organized communities and the ones that have like already those like existing networks, relationships, or projects that they already have in mind. The example I was giving about the vacant property, there's a lot of people who have been like already doing a lot of work on that in particular areas in the islands. So they're very likely to get a project, right? And they already have like, one of the reasons also there might be a lot of connections with the university. So the university, especially the planning department there, and the people who live in San Juan, they're going to have more connections to be able to do these things. The people that live in rural areas that are far away from the university, they're going to have less opportunities, right? So we are in a way also structuring through the community planning these like inequalities, because like, do you choose like the communities that are you know, at the top level? Do you choose the communities that are more in need, or you let the communities to say, we want the plans, right? We are creating the plans. And that's kind of like some of the things that the Foundation for Puerto Rico have been struggling. So it's like they have to actually go and like talk to communities and trying to encourage them. But sometimes, you know, with some communities, it's like the community control part is going to be a challenge.
Thank you.
And we do have a question in the chat.
Oh, okay. So so I will read the question from Isabel Santos. He says like, which other countries or places has your organization used for outreach and with research, and how are community members going together to build educational facilities on the local level as well? It sounds like it is on an upwards process and creating a lot of mobility. I'm not sure if I understand this like second part. So in terms of like I'm part of many different groups. So you know, when I see like an organization, like I working with different ones. So it's like the Chicago Puerto Rican Agenda, the Center for Puerto Rican Studies, Planners for Puerto Rico. But this research was sponsored by the Center for Puerto Rican Studies. So they have been like organizing classes and courses. Right now there's a lot of like webinars, but the idea is that they will give like certifications to people. So they're looking for funds also to make it so it's like almost free to be able to take these like courses in order to like just offer classes that are important. For example, like this might be there's a class somebody's preparing on like housing development, because like not that many people are applying for the low-income housing tax credit, right? You can like combine with like other federal funds. As I said, I was developing a class on like just how to concentrate your nonprofit on be in a particular neighborhood or community or community development corporation. So some of the things that we're doing, but that's mostly in Puerto Rico. So we don't have like any outreach anywhere else really, just in Puerto Rico. But Idea Común, which is like that group, is supported by the Center for Puerto Rican Studies through their funding until now, and their students are the ones like helping, and the Hunter College. So that research center is doing something that they haven't done before. So I hope that kind of answers your question. I wasn't too sure about the second part of it. Maybe you like to clarify.
I can unmute the person if you want.
Yeah, that'd be helpful. Hi, Isabel.
Oh, you can unmute Isabel if you want, or type the question.
I think that a lot of this is very systematic with the way, you know, like intergroups are kind of have been oppressed throughout history. And I think that, you know, you make a good point about that a lot of people will go into an area and then try to like do damage reconstruction, and not like if they're not living there or don't have like a connection to the community, it's harder, it's more difficult, or there's different, you know, areas or community organizations that like you have to figure out the funds and the, you know, priorities of.
Yes. So that's why it's so important that the local nonprofits then get the capacity in order for them to get the funds. So part of like what I have been trying to say is that there's definitely a gap, right? There's a gap there in knowledge and the ability to get those funds. But you know, in terms of like talking about Puerto Rico and the nonprofit sector, for in Puerto Rico, the government is like pretty big, and it's a lot of people like live in poverty. So it's like 50% of people live in poverty. We still have like tons of like public housing. We have a lot of informality. So Puerto Rico looks like very different that the United States. And as you were talking about systemic issues, right? So I think that makes it even more challenging because to begin with, there's not a big professional class also like that, or you know, like planners and people with like degrees that or that many connections to universities, right? So it's like that does help also to recovery because you can have that technical expertise, and we as planners have a role that we can provide the technical expertise, and of course we can be advocates, right, of like lower income communities and communities that exactly know what they need, but they actually need like a way to articulate it in the technical manner that you need for these proposals. However, a lot of the planners there, I think that they might consider themselves as advocate planners, right? And the University of Puerto Rico is doing tremendous work, but they are super overextended. So just imagine that you're the only, UMass Amherst is the only university, like, you know, miles and miles and miles, and all the faculty are like the ones that are the technical experts that are going to apply for these grants. It is very hard.
Yeah.
And I think that there was like one more comment. Is this Mark? I don't know if you wanted to say your comment.
How does the hand raising work? Sorry, I had a question for a couple of minutes.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you for your talk. And I think it's kind of striking that like the budget that nonprofits have and like government organization.
Mm-hmm.
And do you have examples where these nonprofits could tap into this money, like work with federal organization to get some of the resources? Because you had another number, like 5 employees average, so it's pretty low.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So to kind of to emphasize and amplify the capacity.
Yeah, so I mean, right now, like there's like 2 different funds are being like given broadly, and it's pretty much you just have to apply. Really, that's like you just have to have the paperwork, and it's not, maybe it's like 5 pages or something like that. And so there's the mitigation funds like from the CDBG or community development block grants. And also there's the community development block grants, the disaster recovery. And as I said before, they're not that hard to apply to, but a lot of people are intimidated, right? So a lot of these like workshops that have been happening from El Centro or from other organizations, it's like how to do it and showing people how to do it. And also encouraging them that they're very likely to get it, because that's the other thing that people feel like if they're not likely to get it, they won't apply. Especially this happens in the farming industry. My family, as I said, they're like in farming, And there's like lots of farmers, they said, no, I'm not going to apply because I most likely will not get it, based on previous experiences, not in the federal government, but more like I have applied for SDA and didn't get it. But really, like the CDBG-DR funds and MIT funds are like very different in the sense that there's so much money to give out and so many good projects. It's very likely that people will get funded. So it's like how to spread the word and how to get people to fill out these applications.
Okay, thank you.
So I don't think that's any more.
Well, I have one for you.
Oh, okay. Yes.
So since I'm kind of a slight numbers person, so what year did you do your survey in?
This is 2019.
So
it was
Maria,
kind of, it is kind of a year and almost a year and a half, I would say.
okay, so and Maria and Irma happened in 2016, right?
Yeah, 2017. Yeah.
So is there a way
September.
that you could go and, because I know that you did like a large survey and then you did the 20 with your interviews to
Yeah.
look at their fiscal capacity over time, meaning looking at their 990 tax form, like from 2015, looking at it now, and then maybe a year or two later to see, have they diversified anyway?
No, I was looking in the 990s, and maybe that's the last time it was done. Is that what you're saying, like in 2015? Because after that, that program wasn't funded anymore. That you get like
no.
data.
Since they're nonprofits, they have to file a tax return, and in the tax return, they tell usually who their biggest funders were, or at least what their annual budgets were. And so another question would be now, since you've had Maria and Irma and these big disasters, did they expand or did these natural disasters winnow out weaker nonprofits?
Yeah. Well, that seems like a very interesting analysis. I only had the list of nonprofits. I do not have the 990s. I was looking at, there was a database and I cannot remember now, but I think that they stopped collecting that data. But you can look at the old data because that was, I don't remember, it was years back. It wasn't that long ago. So you actually can look at the 990s, even if it's 5 years ago or whatever it is, and then look at that and also compare it with the report that they gave for that year. But that's a great recommendation. I haven't thought about that. Thank you, Daryl.
Well, follow the money. Follow the money.
Follow the money, yes. and you know, I imagine that a lot of nonprofit organizations also went under, but I didn't do that analysis. And also a lot of nonprofits were created too. That came up mostly in the interviews.
But the thing is, since you have that sample of everyone you randomly called, you can just call again. Do you still exist?
Right, yes. That's gonna be the other paper.
All right, well, we know some students who need work.
Oh, all right, you know, wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much.
Frank, you want to close it down? Boys.
Yep, thank you. Thank you, Daryl. So thanks again, Evis, for your great talk. Are you hearing me?
Yes,
yes.
yes.
Okay, because Mark is doing like.
Oh yeah, and thanks, Mark, for the recommendation of
yeah,
Robert
thank
Merton.
you. And yeah, please everybody stay tuned for the next week too. And thanks, Evis, for your great talk. Hope I see you in person soon.
Oh yes. Oh well, it's like great to meet you all, and soon I hope to see you soon.
Yes. Great. Thank you a lot to offer. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you very much. Stop the recording.
You see, Nathan, that wasn't so bad.